The 80s, a time of invention, an era synonymous with lurid colors, pop music, and outrageous fashion, but an era of scientific innovation nonetheless. The night of 26th April 1986, the V.I. Lenin nuclear power station at Chernobyl, Pripyat, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Nuclear reactor number 4 explodes. What happens as a result? A fire that lasted 10 days, the evacuation of a whole city, thousands of deaths, 5 million people now living in areas considered contaminated with radioactive materials, the worst nuclear disaster in history. This was the impact of Chernobyl. But what could have possibly happened that led to such a colossal disaster? This is Chernobyl explained. The story of Chernobyl begins with the atomic nucleus, made up of protons and neutrons. A regular nuclear reactor aims to generate energy by the splitting of uranium atoms, known as nuclear fission. Most uranium atoms have a total of 238 protons and neutrons. However, every once in a while, one comes along that lacks 3 neutrons. It is an isotope of uranium known as U-235 and is less tightly bound and lighter than the normal uranium atom. If a neutron strikes one of these U-235 nuclei, it splits into 2 neutrons and a few other materials known as fission products. Fission results in some nuclear mass being transformed into energy. Some of this energy powers the neutrons, which are at this point moving very quickly. Powered by this energy, some of these neutrons go on to strike more uranium nuclei. This results in what is known as a nuclear chain reaction, producing energy again and again and again. To help control the reaction, the nuclear reactor has what are known as fuel rods. These rods are immersed in water, which acts as a coolant and a moderator. The moderator helps slow down the neutrons produced by fission to keep the chain reaction going. Control rods are inserted into the reactor core to reduce the reaction rate or withdrawn to increase the reaction rate. The heat created by fission turns the water into steam, which spins a turbine to produce clean electricity. That is a summary of how a regular nuclear reactor works. But reactor number 4 in the Chernobyl nuclear plant was not a regular nuclear reactor. It was an RBMK, which stands for Reactor Bolshoi Mощности Kanaini, or High Power Duct Reactor. Originally, it was in design from 1964 to 1966 and is very different from most other power reactors. The difference was that instead of using the isotopically enriched water that traditional reactors used, the RBMK reactor used plain water as a moderator in order to cut cost. In addition to this, water was used as a coolant. In reactors like this, excess steam generation reduces the slowing of neutrons needed to sustain the nuclear chain reaction. This leads to a reduction in power and is a basic safety feature in many reactors. What happened on the night of the disaster can be explained very simply. In a nuclear reactor, the reactivity either goes up or down. The reactor's operators only maintain balance. U-235 atoms collide and split apart, increasing reactivity. But if the reactivity is not balanced, it keeps rising and never stops. To balance the reaction, boron control rods were introduced to reduce reactivity. However, to cool the system, cool water is also introduced. As it takes heat out of the system, it turns to steam, or what is known as a void. In the RBMK, there was what is known as a positive void coefficient, meaning the more steam present in the system, the higher the reactivity, creating more heat, which creates more steam, meaning more heat, which creates an endless cycle. This endless cycle is resolved by the negative temperature coefficient. When nuclear fuel gets hotter, it becomes less reactive. So in summary, fuel increases reactivity, control rods and water reduce it, steam increases it, the temperature rise reduces it. This reactor and the science working in the background powered whole cities. The nuclear reactor was a brilliant idea, but only if it was run properly. As U-235 splits apart, it is broken down into a new element, xenon, which reduces reactivity. When the core is running at full power, it burns the xenon away, so it causes absolutely no harm. However, in reactor 4, there was a delay. It was held at half power for 10 hours, because a test was supposed to have been run on it that day. So the xenon did not burn away. It built up, which poisoned the reactor core. This is what caused the explosion. Science works to the tiniest of details. The littlest mistake could cause a huge problem.